Against the motion, Ilan Pappé is an Israeli historian, an anti-Zionist activist, a professor at the University of Exeter. He has challenged traditional versions of Israeli history. Ilan Pappé, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
The equation that is being put in front of you tonight is both outrageous and ridiculous. If only because it makes every Palestinian in the world, almost everyone who lives in the Arab and Muslim world, anyone who regards themselves as liberal or on the left, it turns all these people into anti-Semites. Whereas quite a few people who regard themselves as Zionists, like the Christian Zionists, are actually anti-Semites themselves. But it is important to challenge it because it was used with some effect to stifle the debate on Palestine in the West. This allegation is used in order to prevent the promotion for positions of power of politicians known for the long-term support for Palestine. By defaming these politicians as anti-Semitic, official Israel and its supporters worldwide hope to bring them down, as in the case of Jeremy Corbyn, or delegitimize them, as in the case of Ilhan Omar in the American Congress. So this is a good opportunity and an appropriate venue to say loud and clear that if you are against Zionism, or if you define yourself as I do, and anti-Zionist, you are not anti-Semite, or in my case, a self-hating Jew, which my doctors told me is an incurable disease, and I would have to live with for the rest of my life. I will make 5 points, one long one and 4 or 5 short ones. Anti-Semitism is an old, ugly attitude that demonizes Jews because of who they are and led in the past to horrendous policies of discrimination and genocide. It still prevails today, and despite the passing of years, it's basically not changed much. Its origins are deeply rooted in the Christian faith and were adopted in more recent years by right-wing supremacists and some extreme Islamic groups. Anti-Zionism, on the other hand, is a new phenomenon, as is Zionism, and dates back to the 1820s, when, as you know, Zionism began as a Christian project before it was a Jewish project. And then it was part of an internal debate within evangelical Christianity. Anti-Zionism then was a moral position against romantic nationalism and Christian fundamentalism that today we call Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism is an evangelical belief that the return of the Jews to Palestine would precipitate the second coming of the Messiah, the resurrection of the dead, and the conversion of the Jews to Christianity, or their barbecuing in hell. Now, these barbecuing Christians, who are very important, are anti-Semites who want to get rid of all the Jews they don't like and get in return the only Jew they want, Jesus Christ. It's a double bill. They are today the most important base of President Trump and his ilk, and they are the most important Zionists in the US, providing immunity for Israeli policies on the ground. When Jewish activists and intellectuals adopted Zionism in response to anti-Semitism in the late 19th century, their antagonists were mainly other Jews. They were either Orthodox Jews who saw a premature return to Palestine as tampering with the will of God and regarded as a heresy the substitution of rich monotheistic religion with the ideologically poor modern idea of romantic nationalism. So they were definitely not anti-Semites. Other Jews believed that supporting universal ideologies such as liberalism or socialism would be the answer, and if they had to move geographically from anti-Semitic environments, they preferred to go somewhere else, mainly to the US, but not only to the US. They were also not anti-Semites. When Zionism became a settler colonial movement on the ground with the building of Jewish colonies in late Ottoman Palestine, and during the British Mandate, the Palestinian national movement perceived Zionism as an existential threat to the indigenous people of Palestine, a fear that turned to be valid, as transpired with the 1948 ethnic cleansing of the people of Palestine during the Nakba. Opposing the Jewish settlers and their plans for the Palestinians' homeland was not anti-Semitic, but anti-colonialist, very much as the Algerians objected to the colonization of Algeria. A small group of the Jewish settlers became anti-Zionists themselves when they consented to live within Arab Palestine as guests, but not as colonizers, as was advocated to them by Mahatma Gandhi in the 1930s. And because of that position, he was never honored with a street named after him in Israel, not even a small pathway or a staircase. After the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, anti-Zionism as an anti-colonialist ideology continued to inform the Palestinian national movement's vision and strategy, as is manifested in the PLO National Charter, that called for the establishment of a democratic secular state in Palestine that would respect all three religions. In Israel itself, the Communist Party, supported almost exclusively by the Palestinian minority inside Israel, not because of the communist ideology, but because it was the only anti-Zionist party Israel allowed to exist, they regarded Zionism as an ideology of discrimination and apartheid. Most scholars today looking at Israel then and today agree that this is a valid point, which again has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Two, in our century, anti-Zionism is a moral position against the Israeli structural violence directed at the Palestinians, which is attributed by anti-Zionists such as myself to an ideology that is not only endangering the very existence of the Palestinians, but is also very bad for the Jews who live outside or inside Israel. This ideology generates anti-Semitism. Opposing it might bring it down. In our century, anti-Zionism is a scholarly position, a moral stance, and a vision for the future. As a scholarly position, it frames Zionism as settler colonialism, similar to European settlers movement who went to the Americas, South Africa, and Australia, encountering indigenous people and removing them in order to create new homelands for themselves. It's a moral stance that rejects an ideology that imposes an apartheid system inside Israel, a military occupation in the West Bank, and siege on the Gaza ghetto. It's a vision for the future of a democratic state for all, by restoring justice to the land, by respecting United Nations Resolution 194, calling for the unconditional return of the Palestinian refugees expelled in 1948 and since the Nakba. This may be a utopian view, but it's not an anti-Zionist one, anti-Semitic one. Three, for those who claim that anti-Zionism is a refusal to recognize the right of Israel to exist, we should say that states do not exist by right. They are founded by historical processes, and they become a fait accompli. The debate is about the nature of the state and the regime. We are all entitled to wish for and work for a better, more just, and egalitarian state for everyone who lives in Israel and Palestine, and for those who were expelled from there. Four, in 1975, a vast majority of the United Nations member states defined Zionism as a form of racism and racial discrimination. It was passed with the same majority that passed the 1947 resolution recognizing Israel. The difference was that in 1947, the colonized world was not represented in the United Nations. In 1975, it was. But it was still trying to find its way in the post-colonial world. The Third World's discourse equated Zionism with continued colonialism. Alas, neoliberalism, corruption, and post-colonial political system, corruption in the post-colonial political system, and aggressive American imperialism have casted to the sideways of history this impulse and energy. But at its height and within it, anti-Zionism was part of the wish of the colonized people to build a better and more just world. Again, nothing to do with anti-Semitism. When the 1975 resolution was revoked in 1991, the debate on Zionism entered a new phase, its present phase. After the horrific events in 9/11 and the so-called war and terror, the Israeli Hasbara invented the threat of a new anti-Semitism. This was the only way to repel the moral outrage people around the world felt towards the policies of incremental genocide in the Gaza Strip and the brutal oppression of the West Bank. If you voiced criticism against these policies, you were depicted as a new anti-Semite, and the Israeli academia was recruited to provide scholarly scaffolding for such an accusation. The Western elites bought or were intimidated into buying this false allegation. But the civil society, and in particular the younger generation, reject with disgust this attempt to silence them. They know enough to call the bluff and understand the full meaning of solidarity with the Palestinians. They demonstrate in the streets, in their campuses, and join the Palestinians on the ground at the personal cost to show how outrageous it is to call the pure struggle for justice anti-Semitic. If you are an anti-Zionist today, you are not only standing firmly on a sound moral base in condemning this ideology that generates all these crimes, you are also expressing your disgust at the hypocrisy of your government, mainstream media, and academia. We will not be silenced by false accusation of anti-Semitism, and neither should the British Labour Party be intimidated by cynical media without a moral backbone or sinister legislation efforts utilizing a justified struggle against terror in order to provide immunity to Palestine's colonizers and oppressors. Finally, the Labour Party is responsible in many ways for the debate we have today. We all know that the so-called revelation of institutional racism, institutional anti-Semitism in the Labour Party began not on the day that Corbyn was elected as a leader, but after 2 attempts to depose him and failed. Then suddenly the campaign emerged. I know the force of this campaign of intimidation. I faced it myself. It is ugly, unfair, and destabilizing. But the proud party with the historical role of defeating fascism in this country in the 1930s should not so easily succumb to false allegation of anti-Semitism. Finally, we should retake, five sentences. Let us retake the conversation and prioritize it. Let us discuss how to stop the destruction of Palestine and the Palestinians, which the Trump's deal of the century wants to do. Let us fight violent fanaticism wherever we encounter it. Uproot racism of all kinds without building a hierarchy of victims, and remove silly and outrageous equations like the one titling the event tonight. Thank you.